Hi, I'm Daniel Likis, and welcome to Book 101 Review. And today we're having a Safa Sunday.
Hello, everybody. I hope you're having a fantastic time zone. I know I'm bopping. I'm like, oh yeah, here we go. Having a fantastic time right now. Loving the music. Welcome to Book 101 Review. I am Safa Burnell, a cyberpunk and mythpunk author, also a poet and somebody who is a great lover of many historical periods, because that is what I did the majority of my academic research in, was historical kind of fiction going back to the Epic of Gilgamesh all the way to about 50 years after Shakespeare. So I'm looking forward to this.
Yes,
Not
and
like
we're
I don't
gonna
look
read
forward to
one of your book today.
Yeah, we are going to read a scene from Ginnungagap later, which is an unreleased novel. It's still being worked on,
Hmm.
but I think it'll be interesting.
Interesting. But before we go on, Miss Bernal, let's shout out our listeners from where? Wait, I'll just uh go to our ranking tops for the last 30 days.
Goodness.
Okay, so
Stay
let's
alive.
shout out our listeners. Miss Bernal from. Okay, here we go. Oh, Norway.
Ooh.
Thank you so much.
So a
Can
special
you
shout out today. Oh, yeah. Ooh. Shall I
please
go for
do?
it?
Yeah,
Awesome.
please.
Like, whoops. I kind of like, oh, yay, coffee. Words on a screen. Uh, a special shout out today for Book 101 review listeners in Mexico, New Zealand, Tanzania, Moldova, Egypt, the United Kingdom, Poland, and Norway. Skrevet.
Yay!
Hi,
Thank you so much,
Norway. Oh, good to
Norway.
see you.
Thank you
That's a
so
place
much
I
for
know.
Yeah, I love Norway, especially the fjords. And one more, Miss Vernal. I have another platform which are looking for our ranking tops because every agency, I think they have different places to cover in. Okay, Miss Vernal, please do shout out to our listeners in.
Ooh. Book 101 review is number 7 in St. Kitts and Nevis with books, and number 14 in St. Kitts and Nevis with arts. We are number 20 in Swaziland for books, 42 in Cote d'Ivoire for books, and 43 in Serbia for books. Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup. And welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us today. And a shout out to one of my best friends in the world is Serbian. So I'm going to say shout out, Kat. There we go.
Yes, thank you so much for supporting this podcast. And of course, I just want to take this privilege to also people listening on my Geography 101. Thank you so much. This is my least podcast that I'm doing, but I'm doing good in the ranking in Egypt, Hungary, Morocco, Korea, and Poland. Thank you so much for supporting all my podcasts. So, Miss Bernal, what will be our continuation, right? It's a continuation for
Yeah,
our historical fiction novels.
we are
So what?
talking.
Yes, we're talking. So what will be distinguished
Historical
historical fiction from other genre of fiction?
research. I mean, number one is research. Yes, there is research to do on any kind of book that you write. You know, if you are writing books and you're not doing any research, you're either writing only what you've personally experienced, or I'm going to challenge you to go and read some books and to research some things. You know, sorry, but that's just the way of it. You know, there's tons of things on a daily basis that I have to look up, read, research, and make sure are accurate, and kind of call myself on every once in a while, even if it's something that's like, oh yeah, well, you know, with Caleb Matheson's character in the Judge of Mystic Saga, it's how a gun works. Well, obviously, you know, I've been in North America for so long and seen so many different TV shows and cop shows and movies and things like that. They've got guns in them all the time, but it's like, wait a minute. I have never even held one. Hold on. And then I'd hit up my beautiful brother in the United States and be like, excuse me, Noah, a little help, please. And it's like, okay, like, here we go. Let's go through everything. This is what you need to know. Here's your research. Here's this. These are good sources to look at and things like that. Like the weight of one, how you change the magazine, how you get it ready to fire, all of these different things. Like, yes, I've seen tons of guns on TV shows and different things like that. Thankfully, my experiences of actual violence have been smaller. They have been not as prevalent. So, thank goodness for that. But I've seen a lot of that kind of thing, but I haven't researched a lot of that. So you still need to do your homework. When it comes to historical fiction, you are not just dealing with a bunch of research on how somebody could hold a sword, what side of their body a man would hold a sword on, and so how that would interact with their daily life, how they would present themselves, where they would wear their cloak if they had a cloak on, do they have a cloak, do they just have a jerkin, like what are they wearing, what kind of temperature is there in certain historical periods. All of that stuff matters, and depending on what historical period you're choosing, all of that can be looked up. And my experience is that if it can be looked up and you can, as an author, be called on it, you will be. There will be people who will make it part of their day to tell you you were not accurate, and to tell you you should have changed this, that, or the other thing, or why didn't you do this, or why didn't you do that. That is just part of the thing, because you're putting yourself in a specific time period, potentially a specific place, potentially a specific series of events. People can look those up. They can see what we know of, information that we have. And I'm very hesitant to say what actually happened, because no one knows what actually happened unless you were there. And even then, it's kind of sketchy with the way human beings remember things. But again, like I said in Movies 101 review today, we don't have a time machine unless you're a conspiracy theorist. In which case, I think there's a time machine in the Vatican. But if really, you have to absolutely do proper research. Proper research being, it's fun to put on something that is within the historical time period that you're working in, being like, well, I'm going to watch these movies about this historical time period. But that's putting a lot of weight, and potentially unintentional weight, on the creators of those movies to say, well, I'm getting my information on how this time period worked from another piece of fiction. The best practice for research is to go back to as many primary sources as you possibly can, or as close to a primary source as you can. And make sure you have everybody with different points of view. Because if all of a sudden you're getting all of your research from one specific echo chamber, it's going to show. And that's not as complex and not as wonderful as we can make it when we allow more complexity and more opinions into our world.
Very well said, Miss Burnau. And thank you, James, for watching us. Thank you so much. So, how important is historical accuracy in historical fiction novel?
I think almost more than in film, I think it's a little bit more important to have historical accuracy in a historical novel. I think that it can be taken to an extreme where you have, half of the novel be about detritus of daily life instead of the actual events of something. But I think that the way people present themselves, the way they talk, the way that they move through society, how they move in their clothing, how do they get their food? What kind of food do they eat? Do they have somebody making it for them, or do they have to make it themselves? All of these different things that we expect in our daily life now can be radically different or strangely the same. If you lived in ancient Rome during one of the Republican periods, and you were living in kind of mid to lower income areas, the likelihood is you may not have had a kitchen. And so you were getting basically all of your food, either, bread and preserved things, or you were going out to one of the food places that would make your food fast and hot. All of a sudden you're like, oh, they had fast food in the Roman era? Well, yeah. It's not Burger King. It's not McDonald's, but they did have food that people could go get. You think of, too, places where there is a huge market culture. and that kind of thing. Well, did every income strata have access to an oven? No, they didn't. So where did they get their bread? Well, they went to shop for it. Oh, you have your own oven? Oh my goodness, you must be, this great big farm estate and different things like that. Like, you have to think of these kinds of things, because just the physical act of getting a piece of bread becomes incredibly different. And not that you have to focus on that for a chapter and a half, but you do have to know that if this person is walking around with sliced loaf of bread in their basket, how did that happen? And why did that happen? Where did you get that information from? Whoa, I just thought it would be easier if the bread was pre-sliced. Okay, so somebody sliced the bread for them at the stall. I don't know if I believe you. And why would you do that if the bread would go stale faster? Oh, well, I didn't think about that. Well, did you think about how they make bread at that period of time? Oh, no. Well, specific cultures too, they don't cut their bread. They tear their bread. In certain North African cultures and things like that, you get, bread is such an important part of the diet that you don't cut it. You don't put a knife to it. You tear and you rip and you enjoy it that way, in other ways. So you have to do that research in order to have those tiny little things that usually only take a sentence or two to add in. Not paragraphs, just sentences, maybe phrases, to add the appropriate enlivening to the manuscript without bogging it down. But I definitely think that poor research is the doom of historical fiction, and that if for whatever reason your research is what I would call maybe not the best or subpar, then again, I'm going to question you as an editor. I'm going to go, okay, so is this a historical fiction piece, or is this a piece of historical fantasy? Make your own world, create your own thing. If that's what you want, how does it work? That can be the beginning of a beautiful fantasy world. Tell me more. Let's see where this goes. My favorite starting point when it comes to historical fiction, when, somebody would come into one of my critiquing live streams, is, okay, how does somebody make a cup of coffee? Oh, they don't drink coffee. Okay, what do they drink? Oh, well, I guess, well, I mean, there's fruit. Okay, so how do they get a glass of fruit juice? Oh, well, I don't know if they do. Okay, so what do they consume? Are they humans? Yes. Okay, so did they just drink water? Oh, I haven't thought about it. Or, well, yes, actually, they have various kinds of ales and different things. Okay, great. Show me and tell me more. Oh, yeah, well, they drink a lot of tea. Okay, so this is in the about 1100s in England, northern France. Yeah. How did they get the tea leaves? What? So, yes, tea existed, and tea was a wonderful part of many cultures. But the further you get from Asia, the harder it is to find tea leaves in the medieval period. So what are they actually drinking? Is it a tisane? Did they make an herbal tea? Well, what's an herbal tea? Is it tisane? So what is it? Okay, they took a bunch of herbs, they put it in boiling water to make it taste good. Okay, there we go. How are you going to label that? It's not tea. It's not your cuppa. It's not a mug of oolong. That didn't necessarily exist back then, unless you were closer to the Mediterranean, closer to Constantinople, kind of those areas in there that had more trade routes open to the Silk Road and to the rest of the world and into Asia. So those little things, though, come on. If you're going to
Yes.
put it in, you have to know it.
You have to know it. So, how do authors of historical fiction balance fact and fiction in their narratives?
Decide really early where your deviations are going to be and how serious they're going to be. If it's the way that somebody, I think right now, what I would say, it's the way certain people react to others. And I say that, there's a lot of wonderful historical fiction that was very well written, where, let me just put it this way, female characters were acting very modern. And there's still excellent pieces of literature that were written very well. Is that accurate? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. The way that people reacted to each other, the way they talked to each other, who they were allowed to have conversations with, what socioeconomic status they would have to be in order to have certain, privileges beyond, just kind of being around, and then what socioeconomic level you'd have to be where that privilege was completely gone, so it didn't matter. You should know those things, because it'll reflect on how you can actually write something. And if you want the relationships to blend with historical accuracy, then certain things which are potentially offensive nowadays were just commonplace then. The gender binary was very full in force. The way that people spoke to each other was very guarded in certain levels of society, in certain places. Other places, not so much. You have the families where, the blacksmith and his wife and their kids. Well, his wife's out there making nails. She's out there doing business. The alewives are out there making brews to make sure people have hydration and things like that. And they're making their money. And it wasn't until men realized, that, oh, wait a minute, these alewives are making a lot of money. They are very independent businesswomen. Maybe we should be making ale. Certain things like that were happening in society, but how does that reflect on a character like Hildegard von Bingen, who was an incredible resource for what was going on in medieval Central Europe at the time, around Germany. And she's a Catholic saint. And she's also, she wrote an incredibly kind of pre-medical book about herbal medicines and things like that too. Just an incredibly intricate book. And so you could see what they believed medicine was in those times. Like, what were they using to take care of fever? What were they using when somebody had rickets? What were they using when certain people had different things, and making tinctures and growing certain things for medical reasons and things. But then you also have her music, and you have everything else, and you have her frustration that every time she would say something, it was always colored by the fact that she was a woman. And so only unless she had a man around that was like, okay, yeah, listen to her, was she being taken seriously. In certain aspects and not others. When she was within the cloister of her nunnery, her area that was hers when she was an abbess, then she was the one who could, control a whole lot more and talk. But it's important, I think, specifically if you're writing historical fiction and not historical fantasy. If you're writing historical fiction, then these relationships do deserve to be explored, not necessarily from the lens of today, although there do need to be recognizable things. But if I'm reading a historical fiction piece, I don't necessarily want a character that is speaking the exact same way that she would if she lived in New York in the 90s, in, medieval Russia, or in, the court culture of Japan in the Heian period. Well, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to go out here, and I'm not wearing all of those different clothing. I'm just going to wear boy clothes because they're easier. It's like, well, okay, that's okay. Let's go back to the research. Do you actually want to write historical fiction or historical fantasy? Which is totally fine. If you do want to write historical fantasy, write the fantasy. Write the fantasy. Just don't necessarily say it's inspired by history, but it's not meant to be accurate.
Going beyond. Miss Bernal, I just want to plug in tomorrow for my live interview with Mr. Dam Ram. He's an Emmy-nominated producer and award-winning television writer-producer. We are talking about his debut novel, Long Run. So please tune in tomorrow, 8 a.m. PST, this same channel. So please tune in. And Miss
Sounds
Bernal,
good.
can we read some of chapter of Ginungagap?
All right. So, a little bit of a preface to this. Ginungagap is currently in the middle of being written. It is not complete yet. And so this is how I'm putting kind of more historical elements into something which is myth punk. The genre of this book is myth punk, urban fantasy, kind of contemporary fantasy. The world that we spend the most time in is 2017 Earth. And so we're used to 2017 Earth. And then one of the characters, Caleb's father, Raynar, ends up being swept away to Asgard by his treacherous brother. And this is Asgard. And of course, this is a fantasy inspired by sort of Viking era Scandinavian culture. And so I'm playing around with various historical elements in this piece, while at the same time I just want to make sure people recognize that Raynar is wearing blue jeans. He's like, he's from Earth. He's been living on Earth. He might be a son of Thor, but he's living on Earth. He's living in 2017. So I was hoping to kind of get in a little bit of that kind of thing going on. So here we go. This is from Ginnungagap, exclusive at Book
On
101
Book
Review.
101. Woohoo!
Flickers of yellow flame blanketed the dim hall, if it was a hall in the first place. Ghosts of carvings wobbled like shadows, flickered on aged wood, stained by the patina of scrub brush cleaning and soot. Ghosts, shadow cast from light flickering on carvings and knotted wood, danced in Raynar's blurred eyes. Was he Raynar, son of the living god, a deity converted to a new realm, the first of a schism which broke across the northern sky in bursts as green and abrupt as the aurora borealis? As the scent of oil and beeswax, the odor of old wood, and the dust collected on furs met his nose, broke through the cloying bitterness of the last day, the sensation of Raynar faded away. Left bereft and unwanted, changed with his clothes, which upon a hand stroking down his body, Raynar realized were gone. Gone were combat trousers and the long-sleeved tack shirt, replaced by homespun wool, the crease of linen against his skin. The clothes sung in his mind like a memory of night fires and mead halls, of a little village which smelled overwhelmingly of fish in the right seasons, when their catches were dried, when the boats came back from their raids. Mothi. The room whispered his name, the name of his birth and curse of his nature. Mothi, Aesir of anger, god of rage. Mothi laid on a layer of fur. The grotesque timbre of his own groaning voice was modeled by whatever mechanism Magni and Cormac used to bring him into a state of neonatal helplessness. Throat burning in the cloying air, Mothi sat up on sore muscles. His arms burned underneath him, fingers shivering from an exertion surprising. One bereft of the might and the strength he played with between digits made of wrought iron or adamant steel. Anemic smoke drifted to a wood grate in the dim ceiling, curls of gray and the brown and ochre he could make out in the gloom. As his eyes adjusted to the dour space, he saw carvings and furs hung over furnishings covered in faded cloth, brittle as worn paper, furs half consumed to the skin. This place was once beloved. The aura of care divined through each comfortable garment, each seat a masterwork of the carver's and carpenter's arts, each fur covering a blanket embroidered across its edge, each cup and bowl and pot set next to the dead fire, once as pristine as a new shop full of wares. Age dulled them, cracked wood which resisted degradation for centuries, split by time's vectors as precise as an axe's cloven swing. In his groggy eagerness to seek a glimpse of a door, one fur-clad bundle on a low bench and chair quivered. I named you before Allfather took your bundle out of my arms. Mothi, a mighty name for your mighty promiscuous father. Did you know that I named you? Shifting to the side of the fur-draped bed he now realized he was laid upon, Mothi wove his hand across the plane of space between in an attempt to clear his vision in the gloom. At least I named you, before you were cast out. Sif? Mother. Say it. A warbled plea draped in the woman's soft voice, the timbre as broken as the drinking vessels, as stale and lacking as the long house built around them. Say it. Mother.
Wow. Bravo, bravo, Miss Bernal. And
Still a work
looking
in
forward.
progress.
Yes,
But
looking forward for
yeah.
that. Ginun Gagab this year. So, how do historical fiction novels influence readers' understanding of history?
Hopefully it brings to life certain periods of time that they might otherwise not engage with. So hopefully it makes them see that while humanity is very similar, our instincts, our emotions, the way that we connect or disconnect from other people, a lot of that does not necessarily change as much as we think through time. But what changes are the technology around us, the institutions around us, the way culture works, the way that our lives exist. Even coming from a feminine perspective, the life of women in Europe, especially in Western Europe, because in Eastern Europe is quite different. But the life of women, say again in England or France or Germany, changed so dramatically with the technological rise of washing machines. And not just washing machines, but even just the kind of crank presses that they had to wring out water. The dishwasher, the washing machine, the vacuum cleaner, all of these implements that we think of on a daily basis, if you can speed clean your house in an hour, that's a great thing. That used to take up the vast majority of a woman's time. And so think, depending on the time period that you're in, how much time do you have to tell a story? Is the woman sitting down having a cuppa with her feet up on an ottoman? Or is she having this conversation while she's trying to scrub a stain out of another white shirt that she's going to sun bleach afterwards to make sure that it's respectable for church? What are people doing? How did the technology change their lives? How did people get around to a different place? How much of an event was it if somebody went to the next village or to the next country or to the next continent? People traveled. There's evidence that people traveled no matter when you look. There's very much evidence that we were not kind of isolationists in little pockets of the world. Sure, there are more isolationist pockets around, but I do believe that people did travel and that they were aware of the vast world around them, even if they didn't have a lot of information about the vast world around them. But how do these things affect life? And what does that mean for us in our lives? What does that mean for us and how we spend time? I think that it's a fascinating thing to remember and to look at. How long did it take a man to do a certain daily task? How long did it take to build a house? How long did it take to conduct some business? Nowadays you can do a stock trade in minutes. How did they do them 100 years ago? How did they do them 200 years ago? How did they make that work? My spouse's family were farmers. They're farmers from the Ukraine. And so how they lived their lives and how the women in the family lived their lives is very different from the families that I knew from my side, and how they functioned as well in different places with different technology and different times. So I think being able to understand the world and then being able to see where we are in it can make our problems either larger or smaller. And for the most part, I think historical fiction can make a lot of tiny problems, which can get conflated, especially in North America. We can kind of hold on to a lot of issues and a lot of problems in ourselves. And historical fiction can be a way for us to be like, okay, you know what? Actually, it's not that big of a deal. I'm fine.
Mm.
I'm okay. I've got a roof over my head. I've got spices in my cupboard. I could have funded an entire series of battles with the nutmeg that I have. Like, we're okay. Some things are huge because that is our world, but other things are actually smaller than we expected. And I think it's that ability to go to a different place, to read different fiction, to, read stories that take place in different time periods, but also different geographies as well, just to remind us of what's actually important. And then also just because every once in a while somebody will love a bodice buster and they want to read a romance where it's like, oh, but I can't touch you. if only we were married. Oh no, oh, but we can't because you're a duke. Like that can also be a lot of fun and just be pretty and fun. Or, you get some of the sword and sandal movies, which are just an action comedy riot or just an action riot. And they're just wonderful action and fantastic battle scenes. And I love it. You get something like Clive Owen's King Arthur, which was not particularly accurate to any which way of history, but I still love it because I love the battle scenes. And Dagonet, it holds a very special place in my heart. Ray Stevenson was one of my favorite actors ever. And it's sad to see that he's gone now. Uh, that being
One of
said, yeah.
yes, true. Lost in the movies
Yeah.
industry, on the book as a writer, authors. So, Miss Berno, before we go on, I want to invite you to please do listen to my other podcast, Food 101, our fourth season, with Chef Alessandro, one of the best executive chef in one of five-star hotel in downtown Toronto. So please do listen to our latest episode. We talk about top 10 Italian desserts, I think.
Ooh.
Yes, top 10 Italian desserts. Number one is gelato, gelato.
Mm.
Please do tune in and listen to our latest episode, Food 101, on our fourth season. So, Miss Bernal, to sum up our topic for today, what do authors use historical settings to enhance the plot and characters in historical fiction?
Ooh. Okay. So, first off, you have to have a good story. You have to have a good events that are going to happen and take place. But second off, how those events take place depends on the setting, depends on where you are. Are we in a castle, like a keep? Are we in a palace? Are we in a village? Are we in a field? Are we in more of a nomadic setting, like the tents of the Sami as they're going through northern Scandinavia, with the reindeers? Where are we? How does that, oh my goodness. Okay, so number one, you have to go read The Saga of Aldous Roadfelder by Siobhan Clarke. The Saga of Aldous Roadfelder is a Scandinavian historical fantasy, because there's fantasy elements as well as historical elements. It's based in kind of that beginning of the Viking Age in Scandinavian culture, and includes Scandinavian culture and Sami culture of the time period. And for those of you who may not be aware, Sami are nomadic, and they're sort of like the reindeer herders in northern Scandinavia, and they have different language, different cultural stems. They've got a lot of different myths and stories and songs, and so the Sami are different than what we would consider kind of the Danish coming up, the Scandinavians. It's a fantastic work of historical fiction while also being historical fantasy, because there's trolls and undead warriors known as Draugr and the whole thing. Like, it's absolutely fantastic. It's fantasy, but the way that Aldous interacts with the sort of longhouse farming community that she ends up in versus what happens later on in the novel, where she ends up living by this lake in a tiny little basically hut, and the differences between her life in either place, her life with the animals and everything like that, and then her life by herself, and how she cares for the place, how the place itself, that small little hut by the lake, how it changes kind of the way that she lives her life. And what can she hear? Can she sense animals coming? She needs to go fishing. She needs to do this. She needs to fix the door. How does she build a new door? All of that comes in to the Saga of Aldous Roadfelder. And oh my gosh, Siobhan Clarke did such an incredible job. Just such an incredible, amazing job of that book. I think that it is my number one when it comes to historical fantasy, of how you add the setting and where you are, the Scandinavian winters, the short springs and summers, how you add in the Sami as they're going on their nomadic routes, all of these different things. builds so much into the story of Audis discovering herself, discovering her strength as a woman, and eventually discovering a way to break a centuries-old curse.
Oh wow.
I love it. It's so
How
good.
to
It's so
break.
good. Oh, it's
How to break the curse. Oh my
yeah.
goodness.
Yeah.
So, Miss Burnell, can you please invite our listeners to support all your books?
Hello, everybody. Again, my name is Safa Burnell. If you are watching us and not just listening to us, then you can see my website, Beautiful Machines, Safa Burnell, on your screens right now. My website is safaburnell.com or .ca, depending on where you're from. That is SAPHABURNELL. And you can order my books like Usurper Kings, Char and Ash, Son of Abel, Whiskey and Sinner's Blood, Neon Lieben, Cage Wire, so many things. You can also find my books everywhere that books are sold, online and in stores, in paperback, hardcover, and digital. The audiobooks are still in development. That's just the way things go. But please, if you can, think of supporting my work. And otherwise, please go to your local public library, if at all possible, and request the works of Safa Burnell. That would help in a huge way.
Yes, people, let's support Miss Safa Bernal because if you support her, Ginungagap this coming this year and Agape Maki.
It's coming.
So, people and Miss Bernal, thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time. It was always lovely.
Modicom people, see you soon. Please tune in next week with the same day, Sunday, Safa Sunday, live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitch. Miss Bernal, bye for now. Okay.